It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our moderator for the next panel, Ms. Anjali Sastry. She is a senior lecturer in system dynamics at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and I've had the good fortune of taking her course last semester, Business Model Innovations in Global Health, which I enjoyed tremendously. Professor Sastry's expertise lies in three areas: systems dynamics, global health, and action learning. And she has a particular interest in applying systems dynamics to programs and enterprises in order to generate new explanations for sustainability and scale in healthcare delivery. So we think she's the perfect moderator for this next panel, and we're absolutely delighted to have her at the Fletcher School. Let's give her a warm welcome.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to say a couple of words of introduction, and then we're going to be ignited by Ben. And then you'll meet each of our panelists. And in a slightly different format, we decided we'd actually ask them a brief question or two so that you can get to know them by a kind of interview method. So I'll be doing a bit of interviewing. And they don't actually know exactly what I'm asking, so this is exciting. We've heard about so many complex challenges already today. And it's sort of a truism, everyone would agree, that they need multiple approaches. You could look at, I was just reflecting on Shefali's talk, that many complex challenges we encounter, you could actually come up with different explanations of where the leverage might be. Is it in people's attitudes? Is it in how money or information flows? Is it about knowledge? Is it about moving stuff? Where's the leverage point in trying to reach more folks? And academics like to debate this. You know, first we should change attitudes, first we should change behaviors, first we should change the infrastructure. The folks who are actually trying to make it happen don't have that luxury of doing debates. They have to figure out what they're going to invest in trying to change. So these guys have all had experience on that front, and I think that'll be fascinating to learn about. We're going to focus on the last mile, and I've always thought last mile is a kind of a telling term. First of all, it's interesting because it links, we have the last mile is a rare term that has resonance in high tech, as well as in development and poverty reduction. There are not that many terms that are kind of bridge those two fields. So last mile is a challenge that folks wrestle with when they're looking at cable TV, but also when they're looking at getting malaria meds out to the most remote settings. But of course, last mile makes you think about where's the first mile. Who gets to call what's first and what's last? So keep that in mind. I hope we come back to that in our question session. I think that might be an interesting theme to tap into. But as I was saying, our four speakers who are joining us have all had experience in reaching the last mile in a variety of different ways. And our first one is going to get us thinking in a very different way about how one company has tackled the challenge of reaching more folks more efficiently. So I'm thrilled to be introducing to you Ben Pelsiger. You say your last name.
Pelsiger.
Pelsiger. Oh, that was easy.
These questions are going to be really easy.
Yeah. He's going to tell us about Freewheel. He's the operations development manager. He researches and develops initiatives that help Freewheel scale. So he helps his company scale. And he's been building and rolling out a training department that's designed to be efficient and scalable. And it's designed to kind of create its own multiplying effects. And a knowledge management solution that works across its flagship products, as well as internal development within Flywheel. And we'll hear more. So without further ado, Ben Pelsiger.
All right. Hi, I'm Ben Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
And thank you all. I'm Ben Pelsiger. I work at Freewheel. We are a company that helps big media companies monetize their video content outside of linear television. So ad-supported content such as the Olympics, watching right now, on tablets, on mobile, on desktop, on Roku, wherever you can find it. I have a lot of trouble describing what I do. So I'm going to leverage the Upgoer 5 index that restricts the words I can use to only the 1,000 most common words. So I work at a place that helps big businesses put shows on computers. It makes business happen in a new place. It is hard but important. And it's important because there's more eyeballs, there's more viewership going in these fragmented places. And it's hard because these traditional monetization methods that have worked for 60 years and these workflows that have worked for 60 years are now needing to change. So even as we can solve one, more changes might arise, and it's become a very interesting problem to solve. So here's a little background on Freewheel. I'm going to use this 5-stage process for how a company develops. And whereas in existence, you're worried about who you are and who your clients are, and what problems you solve, and where in research maturity, you have a developed solution and you're focused on trying to execute more efficiently. So in 2007, 7 years ago today, we started out of a Starbucks. And as of 2013, we represented the ad decisions, so putting the advertisements into the content, for about 70% of the US cable lineup. So NBC, Fox, we just announced a partnership with Amazon, so on. And we've developed a number of products because there isn't a silver bullet for solving this particular industry. And so what this leads to is more clients, more freewheelers, more products, or more people being responsible for more knowledge than ever before. So what kind of challenges did we face? Well, ramping up was really, really hard. It took me about 8 months to ramp up. And you can imagine if you're doubling the size of your company, you can't afford to have people ineffective or less effective for 8 months, especially when you're growing as quickly as we were. Client onboarding, in the best of scenarios, is constant and expensive. And while we want to develop and deliver customized trainings, that drains our resources across the entire company. And also, as you're growing, we've had the fortune to have freewheelers who have stayed for all 7 years. But how do you shift the culture from people who are these generalists at the start of a company who are heroes? And they want to just, it's easier if I do things myself, I want to tackle everything, to getting to more standardized and people who have more structured positions, which was more indicative of a more mature company. And we found that when you have people just kind of doing solutions over and over again, you can lose the business context. So how do we share that over time? So in 2012, we focused resources on an education initiative. And I'm going to talk about the tenets, the creed, the manifests we used to describe how we were going to work our education. So, of course, when you're doing training, you want to teach people to fish, not to how to eat fish, but how to actually get the fish themselves. So we decided the goal of an onboarding training was, if someone at the end of an onboarding training doesn't necessarily need to know how to do all of the tasks of their job, but they should at least know how to ask questions and then understand the answers, because that actually reduces the cost of servicing them over time, and we have a very white glove service model. And so above all, we're building these mental models, these things that people use to understand the technology and to understand the problems they're solving in the first place. And also, if you want to offer a very customized solution to a very broad range of needs without a lot of cost, what we did was we built training modules so that we can take things apart and put things together for specific needs, and it could be as customized, and if you have to change something, you only have to change a small part. And when we talk about our knowledge base, right, which is our documentation, we just found very quickly that a single document can't be everything to everyone. But with several documents, you can kind of get pretty close. So what we did was we built layers into our documentation. So one document might be what it is. One document might be how to use it. One document might be how it works. And instead of having one very long document where if you just point someone to it, they would spend a lot of time, it would be very expensive for them to find what they're looking for, instead we had customized documentation for those particular people's needs. However, this raised another problem. The problem is we can't afford to write things more than once to begin with, but we also can't afford for one thing to get out of date and for two things to conflict. It's very, very risky. So we went with this approach that they use. It's called data normalization. And database design is one thing, one place, once. And the idea that we can have everything exactly once and that we don't have to worry about things saying contradictory information. And then lastly, everything rusts. Plan for change as you're designing your initiatives. So the way that we found best to do this was we will have solutions that might no longer fit the problems, but as long as we build in business context and we describe what the problem was originally, it'll become very clear. And also it'll be a direction of how we were solving this problem in the first place. And that became a very effective way to build our documentation, to share knowledge, not just solutions. I wouldn't be an operations management person if I didn't show you some numbers. So here you can see we took the design and build phase from about 22 hours across 3 different teams to now, for 1-day training for a client, down to about 1 hour of one guy. And for delivery, we've reduced it from about 16 hours across, again, the 3 teams, down to the 8 hours of training for one person. We've also found if we tag along a new hire, they can get trained at the same time. So whereas it's the illusion of 17 hours, it's really just another person benefiting from the same execution. I hope you're all ignited.
All right. So, Ben, I'm just going to offer a quick reflection, and then we'll tee off the panel here.
Sure.
But a couple of themes for everyone to bear in mind. He's talked about how important it is to shift mental models, which might also mean understand where people are starting from, but understand what you want them to be thinking about. You talked about modularization and kind of designing things that fit with each other, but then that can be broken apart, but they can still link. That's really fascinating. And then you have this focus on reducing cycle time that I think might also echo in some of our other comments. I think that's fascinating too. And thinking about layers. So how is kind of information and maybe even programs and activities, how are they nested and connected? So we might explore some of these themes in the minutes to come. But you've given us some interesting thoughts from a very different sector from some of the ones you're going to be hearing about in a moment. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
All right, so we're ignited, and I'm going to turn to each of our panelists one by one. I'll introduce you to them, and I'll ask them the question first so they know what we're asking. So I want to talk first about the kind of non-apparent ways you found to scale that go beyond building more buildings and shipping more stuff. How have you tapped into the power of shifting people's thinking and understanding so that scale is enabled? We're going to talk about the stuff part of it too, but I'm really interested in how it is that the way you approach things and the way you link actions and results itself becomes a vehicle for scale. Our first respondent is Marie Lesnicki. So she comes to us from Bridge Academies, which you're going to hear about in a moment. Fascinating organization because it has grown so fast and looks to be growing even faster in the years ahead. And her background tells an interesting story in and of itself. She was trained in anthropology, correct? Mm-hmm. She worked in the US in brand management, then went to West Africa, and has had experience working in a variety of domains, which she'll tell us about. We'll hear a little bit about some of those. But she's been at Bridge for how long now?
4 years.
4 years, 4 years, and seen a lot of change there. So her experience includes education, MFS, and telecom. And now is based in Nairobi with a bit of time in DC. Mm-hmm. All right, so lean into your mic and tell us all about this.
Great. So as background, I'm sure a lot of you don't know Bridge International Academies. We are a startup based in Nairobi, Kenya. And what we are doing is providing high quality education to families living on less than $2 a day per person. We're able to do this at a cost of just $6 a month. So about 90% of families can afford to send all of their kids, both boys and girls, which is about 2.8 children per family, to our academies. Right now, it's kind of funny to say since we're still a startup very much in our mind, but we have 259 academies educating 80,000 children, and we employ about 3,500 people, all jobs that we have created in the last 5 years. And why we're still a startup is that we're so far from our goals. Our mission and vision is to reach 10 million children, so we're not even 1% of the way there. And our mental model and everything is based on kind of the opposite of what you're used to with chains. Usually when you see a chain, if you see a McDonald's, if you see a Starbucks, even if you think of the Awesome Foundation from this morning, you know, they start with an idea and then it's like this is working, ding, 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 like, we should do another Starbucks. Like, wow, there's chapters of this. And then they go through the challenges of, well, how do we clone this to make a second unit? And what about a third, and then the fourth, and then the 100th, and then the 1,000th? So they come at it from a very different angle of where you get things right the first time, and then you're like, shoot, how do I actually clone this? Bridge is the exact opposite. When we started, our mission, which is still the same, was to give every child the chance to have a high-quality education. And what we found was that consistently, children from these poor homes living on less than $2 a day, they're consistently underperforming their richer peers. And basically, this is because no one is teaching them. In Kenya, for example, teachers are absent from class 47% of the time. Kids receive 2 hours and 19 minutes of class time a day, and only 35% of teachers passed an exam based on the same curriculum that they teach. So this is the environment these children have, and we were looking at how can we make this work? At what point can you have the quality of education that the children need and the pieces needed for that, and at what point does it match what parents are able to pay? And what we saw was that the cost of developing this was extremely great, and the only way we can even it out is if we did extreme scale. And so our social mission and our business model are incredibly related because they're both based on the fact that we need to reach an incredibly large amount of people so that we can hit this quality we want at the scale we want, and at the price point we want. And this way we can guarantee that the first child's education is as good as the 1,000th and the 10,000th. But this means that from the very beginning, every decision we made was thinking about 1 million kids or 10 million kids, rather than just starting with one unit.
Cool. Great. So Ben articulated the challenge of needing to flip how they do things because they were growing fast. And you talked about how in order to grow, you had to flip how you do things, that you couldn't get to scale without thinking very differently about training and developing materials at this much larger level. That's fascinating. Now we're going to hear from an expert in marketing and brand strategy. We're now going to hear from Tim McClellan. And Tim was COO and now is interim president and COO of TechnoServe, where he's been since 2009. Before that, he was 15 years at PSI. So he knows how to move stuff and get stuff to happen in challenging environments. And he's going to tell us about his experience and his organization's experience in figuring out how to reach scale. You can go up there, or can we come? He's going to show us the slide.
Yeah, let me just work from this slide.
Yep. Cool.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? I think we've had, with my colleagues here on the panel, two very interesting examples that we might sort of combine in a way. TechnoServe is a much older organization. We've been around for about 45 years. From that birth back in the 60s, we've been inspired by the idea that development in poor countries is advanced by a strong focus on the commercial sector, on helping businesses to be more effective, on helping entrepreneurs to thrive, in helping businesses themselves to grow, but also in working in the enabling environment in which those businesses operate. We are an organization dedicated to reducing poverty around the world. So given that we're working in poor countries, we've often been spending a lot of time with farmers, farmer-owned businesses. If you look at where the poor are in the world, that last mile looks very much like farming communities. And so TechnoServe for all of these years has been very much a part of those communities, looking at new ways to open up opportunities for people who are excluded, for people who are operating in different farming and other sectors to gather more value from those activities. And we have a lot that we've learned over the years, and we've recently done a new strategy. So as I was preparing for a discussion with you, this kind of summary of our strategy, what we call our theory of change, I thought it'd be useful to put up, and I think it encapsulates a lot of how we think of ourselves now, In this context of lots of innovation going on in many different quarters, from the private sector, from technology, and how, embedded in here is a lot of how we're having to adapt ourselves, accommodate these new technologies and ways of doing things. So I'll start at the top. We're born as an organization dedicated to poverty alleviation, so we're looking for new prosperity for people. That's reduced poverty and increased resilience. As you look at the recent poverty literature, we're really talking about people being resilient when they undergo shocks. The idea that if a health event happens in a family, that family is able to sustain themselves through that event and continue going. So in order to bring about new prosperity, our mission is to bring about competitive farms, businesses, and industries. Somebody said a little bit earlier today that sustainability is kind of a word that's a little bit passé and people are staying away from it. I think we kind of felt the same thing as we thought about ourselves, and we thought this idea that farms, businesses, and industries in which we would try to intervene and support market players, if they were competitive, that was a much more kind of inspiring word for us. And each of the words actually on this page were very carefully chosen. And so we measure those competitive farms, businesses, and industries. We actually measure our vision, our mission now very carefully. And we want to know if there are new revenues associated with our assistance to participants in our programs. We want to know if there are new jobs and how many. We want to know how many women are affected by the work that we're doing. So we have very careful measures around how many women and girls are participating in our programs now. And our goals are very much associated with that metric also. And so in order to bring about this kind of new thriving market system in a given place where we might be working, we really do three things. We as TechnoServe feel like our value addition is around developing capacities of individuals or businesses. So we work with a lot of businesses to think about how they're segmenting their market, how their marketing planning can be developed more effectively. We work with farmers and farmer business organizations to help them develop greater yields and to process their product at the first level and gain more value in doing so. We work across a number of institutions in addition to businesses alone. So if you think about a market system, there would be many players involved. We might assess that even a government institution would require some new capacities. And if we felt that was a key gap in making the market function more effectively, we would figure out a way to try and deliver that service. The second area where we're very much active is in promoting connections among market players. We're thinking about economies where we're working as a complex system. And so how do we look at the different players in that market, be they suppliers of inputs or financiers or farmers or implementers themselves? How do we connect them in a more effective way? How do we insert ourselves or insert subsidies that we might have as part of our projects to adjust incentives in a way that people who've been previously excluded might be more effectively brought into the value chain where we're working? These are the types of things we're talking about when we talk about promoting market connections. And finally, improving the enabling environment. We're often working with many of our countries right now, say in East Africa where we're working. By the way, we work in 30 countries, India, Africa, Latin and Central America. Many of our East African countries right now are seeing a lot of inward investment from multinationals. One of the things that we're looking at is piloting ways where we can work with the community and work with the investor to sort of anticipate how certain issues may become controversial, be they land rights, land usage, how a company may come in and start to execute its activities, and how that may impact the local community and impact the company's social license to operate. If we can help the company and the community to come together to anticipate where areas of conflict may come in, those can be settled and sort of thought about in advance, and the promise of greater employment and greater growth in the community can be realized. So I've taken, I think, more than my allotment, but this is kind of our theory of change. This is who we are. We operate in the last mile, and this is how.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. Our third panelist is going to add in his experience, which I think will be a fascinating complement to Marie's getting us thinking about designing for scale from the outset and a business model that does that. Tim getting us to think about ecosystems. And now we're going to hear from Mark Thurman. So Mark is at the world's largest mobile company. And Vodafone, it's hard to actually get involved with many of the issues that have come up already today without somehow thinking about mobile technology. So A, it's great to get an expert in mobile technology in the dialogue here, but also B, how did Vodafone do this? How did they grow? And what can we learn from their experience? What's the ecosystem that he's been thinking about? And what ideas and advice might he have to offer other folks in the room based on the dialogues that we've already been having? So, Mark, I didn't really tell a lot about your background. You studied music.
Don't shoot me, I'm the piano player,
Yeah, and you still play.
quite actively.
Yeah. So, and he runs marathons, and has been
In the 200-pound class. This is a lot of weight moving very slowly.
and is very involved in which I was gratified to see, the MIT Enterprise Forum as well. And tell us a little bit about your experience and how, again, it's the kind of what you think the ingredients for reaching scale are that have to do with spreading ideas, approaches, mental models, theories of change.
Sure. Thank you, and thanks to Kate for the original invitation, for you for doing all this panel dynamic stuff. So I think you guys are doing a great job, and I appreciate being here. So, and Kate, you've heard parts of this speech. I apologize. So Vodafone's a big honking British phone company. We've got 500 million subscribers on the mobility side. We've got 100 and some odd million more things that are connected. And it's an incredibly large company, $140, $150 billion. We're not that well known in the States. Some of the folks, like Robbie, I think you attacked me earlier in the back. A lot of folks that have been around the block internationally have heard of us. But in the States, no one knows who the hell we are. It's kind of an interesting sort of thing. We, up until next week, have been the part owner of Verizon Wireless, so you might know us in that regard. And you'll probably see some stuff in the Wall Street Journal next week about how the transaction has concluded, which I'm not going to talk about right now, but Verizon bought back their shares is the short version. So the question is non-apparent ways to scale. So I'm part of the machine-to-machine group. We connect stuff, so I have nothing to do with the phone stores or smartphones or anything like that. And that's, first of all, one of the most non-apparent ways for people that think of a big phone company is that we have a huge emphasis on connecting things. We're leveraging our connectivity. And you were talking about the last mile. I look at the last inch. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the things that we're connecting are health devices, as an example. There's nothing more intimate. There's nothing closer to your body, in some cases, as a thing that's a cardiac monitor or something that's helping with chronic diabetes issues. And all of our customers in this world are both large and small companies that are leveraging our capabilities and our footprint, our global footprint, to bring relatively innovative products to the market. We have actually some companies locally that are bringing out HIV compliance to make sure people are taking their meds in wow. I didn't do that.
Dramatic.
And we, per the Nike chat that just concluded, which I thought was fascinating, we're active with M-Pesa. So, and we have an active foundation. So, these are non-apparent ways that I think we've worked on things. But in the 30 seconds I have remaining, our mental model is to pretty much be a sane, sensible partner, which I may not be demonstrating now. We say no to projects very, very frequently. Saying no is a very big deal because it shows that you vetted the process and that you respect the customer, and sometimes some things you just can't do. We also want to work on things that we know will work. We've done it before, it's repeatable. And then what we try and do is take something that's very, very local and apply the scale that we have. You know, we own 80 networks, we're on 550 networks worldwide. It's an embarrassment of riches. But the last things I'll say in my 4 seconds remaining is we have a kind of an internal mantra, which is speed, simplicity, and trust. And that's our mental model. We want to do it quickly, we want to try and tease complexity out, and we want to be a trusted partner.
Great. Great. So a lot of ideas already on the table, but I'd like to ask one more round of questions to the panelists before opening it up to the audience. And the question I think would be really interesting to hear about is, in overcoming constraints to scale, what were some of the most challenging aspects of the problems you had to solve? Especially when it has to do with just getting from a small N to a big N. I'm really interested in that. Did you have to figure out how to do your logistics completely differently? And I don't know if Mark's can look back a bit at where your organization came from and how you've seen growth there, but what were some of the constraints that were most difficult to overcome in getting to scale? And any of you can answer in any order.
I'll take it quickly. Probably the thing that's most interesting is, you know, we're very fortunate in not only in the U.S., but certainly in the Boston area, that we've got great innovation and people trying to do really, really incredible things. But they sometimes forget that outside of the U.S., the pipe is smaller. They're not dealing with LTE 4G networks in parts of Africa where we have an awful lot of network. They're dealing with 2G sometimes. They're dealing with crappy old networks that don't work all that well. So I think the constraint that we have is taking an entrepreneur's vision for this fantastic connected device and saying, all right, it's got to be a lot smaller if you want it to work. That's the short answer.
And how do you get people to appreciate that? I went to the Google headquarters, and they actually have slow internet on purpose, right? Because they actually want their designers to design for constraints. And they call it eating their own dog food, which we've heard sort of play out in various ways. But that's one way. How do you do it at Vodafone?
Again, we're present in a lot of these markets. We try and we work at the very front end of any technical innovation. We want to get in very, very early. It's kind of the Intel inside mentality that's pervaded for a while. We want to be the connectivity inside because we can help them early on. So if your device will work best in this part of India or this part of South Asia or Africa or wherever, we want to make sure that we're designing for the proper environment and also meet the cost constraints, because there are cost models that are quite severe if you want to get certain kinds of products out, medical products in particular. And then lastly, we want to help. We're not going to do the certifications, but we want to be aware of where they are in the journey of getting certed for FDA or some of the other things in the medical world. So there's a lot of information that we bring to bear that we try and help them avoid the constraint. We preempt it as much as we can.
Right. Maria, that sets you up nicely. How did you think about that?
So I think someone said it best a couple of panels ago, when constraints really pull out the best innovation out of organizations. I think a lot of what has helped us work really well are all of the constraints we've actually been dealt with. For us, and I think this is true for a lot of companies, is the idea is it's important to have a great idea, but actually executing on it is incredibly hard, especially when you're trying to scale at the speed that we are. And I joined Bridge when we had just opened academies 3 through 10, and right now we're at 259. And I remember how proud we were because, we had 10 academies. And looking back now, it's kind of like it was a joke. I mean, 10 academies, you can physically visit all of them, you can call everyone, And it gives you a lot of accountability as to what's going on. And as you grow, the biggest constraint is your oversight changes. You can't physically be at all of these academies. You can't see what's going on. You develop these amazing systems and this technology and this curriculum and these manipulatives, but like, is it actually working? Is it being used? Are the kids learning? Are the teachers doing it? It becomes a lot harder to monitor that. Bridge as a company was always focused on technology. That's always was the way we're going to be able to scale everything from household studies to curriculum deployment to analysis. And what we've seen is the different add-ons we've done, not just about deployment and analysis, but also monitoring. So all of our teachers use tablets to teach. That's how we provide them with best-in-class content and drastically raise their content knowledge to teach. In addition, though, to bringing this world-class knowledge through these tablets into the classroom for them to teach the children with, these tablets, because they are data enabled and they're working on Mark's crappy networks, but they still work, we are able to track, when does the teacher show up at school? When do they turn on the tablet? When do they start each lesson? How much time do they spend in each minute of each lesson? And that gives us a new sense of accountability that, maybe we can't be there in person, but thanks to technology, we can actually see what's happening in the classroom.
That's fascinating. So both of you, and Ben too, talked about how having information about what's being used and how can allow you to figure out what's working. But TechnoServe doesn't have that same built-in feedback loop. You're dealing with stuff that doesn't necessarily talk to the internet and talk to the cloud and talk to the database. How do you leverage the power of your network, and yet in this sort of world where you must look enviously at somebody who's got tablets that can measure how much your innovation is actually being used every day and every minute?
Well, you'd be surprised how important tablets are to us. A lot of NGOs who deal with large populations who are trying to bring about changes in performance or behavior in those populations, we're now using these tools as survey tools. So we may not see each of our sort of farming business groups regularly, but we survey them and we do use these tools to a great sort of cost effect. I think, if we think about this idea of what's a constraint or how we're trying to bring about scale, I think for us right now, we're trying to push down creativity to bring scale through our 30 different country operations. I think we're very clear that we're probably not like Bridge Academies where we can drive a lot of this centrally. We're actually more networked and very small at the center. So our challenge is, how do we create great innovation out in the spokes of our wheel and then figure out how to move it around? So one of the ways that we're trying to accelerate that, and we're still kind of early days, is measurement. So we're trying to value behavior change. So we want people, for example, last year we reached about 900,000 farmers in different countries around the world. But we estimate that the farmers who actually were taking on our program and performing to the standards that we were promoting to be about 560,000. Well, we'd like over the next few years to get to a standard of 75%. If we reach farmers and we have a program for them, we'd like to be so effective that 75% of them take on and perform in new ways so that they can enjoy enhanced financial benefits in their businesses. At the same time, we want to drive down costs. So we have another metric that we're using, which is we have 2 or 3 what we call focus sectors, where we have programs in coffee and cocoa, for example, in many different countries. We're very well built out in them. And we'd like to see the cost of reaching those participants in those projects to go down over the next 3 to 5 years.
Interesting.
So we're pushing through measurement, innovation. Once it happens, we then want to share it.
And the focus sectors let you build your own expertise and figure out how to share because you're
Well, they
picking
give us a
domains.
focus. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Now, I'm going to open it up to the audience in just a moment, but I thought that we have such an interesting contrast of folks here who also have commonalities. I'll give you a moment if you want to ask each other a question. So while the audience is thinking of a great question to ask, do any of the panelists have questions for each
So
other?
a minor question for Marie. Weren't you guys just on NPR like 2 weeks ago?
We've been on NPR a few times this year.
Yeah, I just heard about you guys that way. Sorry, don't mind us. I made a connection. It's cool stuff.
Maybe
Question?
for each other.
I have a slight question for us.
Yeah.
I think it's always interesting thinking ahead as to, what is the next big thing that we see happening. And for Mark, like what big innovations do you see coming up? You talked about a lot right now. You're working on a lot of health services. What's next?
It's really what's next. So it's connecting everything, connecting every single thing. Cows, we have, I'm sorry to do the gesture, but cow milking things that are connected so that we can make the dairy farmers more efficient. We have a lot of that going on. So it's connecting like these really tacky industrial infrastructure things in to make them more secure, to make them more efficient, to be able to get some metrics about it. There are a lot of tablets that are being connected and the cost is being driven down that we're seeing, throughout South Asia, throughout Africa. So it's really driving down cost, expanding connectivity, and literally it's connecting everything. I can't think of anything. You probably even see these big belly solar trash things that are around here. Those are connected because it's green and, you avoid the trips with the garbage guy coming out because it'll summon the garbage guy instead of making him come around 3 times a week. So it's connecting everything and it's the most mundane thing that you can imagine. So that's what I see really happening on a daily basis. And it's kind of, to me at least, it's kind of cool.
Cool. Great. All right. Questions from the audience? And let's make the questions quick so we can hear a lot from the panelists.
Question day for me. Am I on? Everybody can hear me. I'm Rachel Fagan. I'm formerly with the Center for Effective Philanthropy and now consulting to nonprofits and startups. Question for you, Marie. I'm going to pick on you, unfortunately, because education is typically viewed by communities as a good, very different from tech infrastructure and business consulting. Right now, you meet the last mile in the face of a governing failure. Is Bridge's strategy long-term to stay a provider of education that is Western-owned and Western-profiting in lieu of a citizen representative and government-run schooling system, or in partnership with, in tandem with?
So the business model that we have set up in Kenya is as a for-profit business that works not against the government, but more parallel to the government. We do a lot of work to follow the national curriculum. We're registered as a test-taking center for all the national exams, and we've been working with the Ministry of Education to set up the Alternate Provision of Basic Education Act. Essentially, in Kenya and all poor countries, about half of the population that lives under $2 a day actually attends private schools. That's how much the government-run schools have been letting down parents. I cited those statistics before, and that's Kenya. Other countries actually have it much worse. That's why in Lagos County, Nigeria, you actually see 90% of primary-age children attending private schools. What we are seeing increasingly, based on kind of the models you see from the US and the UK, is an interest in public-private partnerships. The way regulatory is set up in a lot of these countries, they're not currently prepared for it, but they're becoming interested. And that's a way to kind of tie our causes together. I mean, all of these countries do see that education is what's going to make the big difference in putting them forward, but it's really hard. It's actually usually a lot harder to change an existing system than to create a new one like we're doing. So if you work in the Ministry of Education and you've had the system going on for 200 years, it's hard to find a way to change it. So they're increasingly looking for partnerships, and we're definitely interested in doing that. Did I answer?
That perhaps, can I ask a follow-on to Tim, actually, but it's linked. So you're talking about basically transitioning something from an innovative kind of new entrant into the market who's figured out how to deliver a needed service maybe more effectively than the alternative, than the government alternative. Does TechnoServe do that? Are you trying to transition what you do back to any public sector in any way?
In many cases, we are. I can think of in Rwanda, not too long ago, we had pardon me, I think that's me. We developed a curriculum for workforce development, and it was a great curriculum. And the government really came to us and said, we have several hundred YMCA type, just to put it in a Western context, youth centers where we can take your curriculum and blast it out. And we said, great, how do we do that? So where we can facilitate that, we're eager to do it. I think we want to be much more about scale. Our new vision of ourselves is as a catalyst. And so I say that new vision, I think it's quite aspirational. We tend to like to do things ourselves. That's a little bit in our DNA. But if we're going to be effective as a partner and to achieve scale, we need to catalyze the system that's there and develop new partnerships.
Thank you. Another question?
This question is for Marie also. So obviously you have a very replicable process and you're growing at a great rate of speed, but what is the limiting factor on your growth rate at this point?
Our biggest challenge is hiring. We have quadrupled our workforce every year in operation. We, in November, trained 2,000 teachers at once and hired about 800 of them. We only hire the top graduates. And that's at our academies. At our headquarter level, both globally and in country, we also grow at this rate. And it's incredibly hard to find talent in all of the range of the sectors we work that has both the experience of the scale we're looking for as well as the speed. You get a lot of people who are really energetic, love the cause, but they're not used to working across 259 units, nor are they ready to open 78 schools on the same day. And we do both of these things and want to do these at 4 countries simultaneously by January of next year. And people quickly get lost in the whiplash of it.
But it's such a great question. I wonder if either of the other panelists has an answer too. What do you think is the rate limiting constraint to growth?
I would say the depth of the challenge that we often face. You know, I think behavior changes slowly. We're a behavior change organization. And for those of you who, you know, operate in social psychology at some level, you'll know that often you need, the higher the constraints are, the more repetition, the more ways in which you need to reach a person or a community to bring about that change. And we can go faster, but we're going to miss some of those steps, at least in our current technology, even with the new sort of tools that I think we have available.
Cool. Mark, how about you?
Constraints for growth.
Yeah.
It's prioritizing. We, you know, we're huge. Everybody, especially on the other side of the ocean, kind of knows who we are and wants us to do something with them. And it's really, you know, everything is great. Everything is a great idea, but how do you pick the top 5 or 10?
Yeah.
So, you know, that's our constraint, I think, is really trying to really figure out what's the right priority.
And what have you learned about that?
We're not always right. We goof up. We're fortunate in many ways because of the enormous scale of the company, and it's a wealthy company, so that's kind of cool. We're getting a huge check next week from Verizon. That's kind of cool. What the hell do you do with it? I mean, you know, these are great
everyone in the
problems to
room
have.
might have an idea.
Sorry, but you know, I mean, but these are big problems that our execs
Yeah.
look at.
Yes.
What do you do with all that money?
So how do you prioritize? Do you look at like the metrics of the people impacted, the ease of the project, the coolness of the project?
Within the machine-to-machine group, we prioritize on what we can get done, what can work, because a lot of this stuff doesn't work. I mean, they're great ideas, but if the thing doesn't connect up, what's the viability of the company doing it? And we work with early emerging companies, and part of my work is to help kind of find those and help them get in, you know, big gigantic Vodafone and get some sort of hearing on an equivalent or a parity basis with a Medtronic or Boston Scientific or any of these other massive companies. We naturally want to work with our peers, with big, you know, intergalactic, global, huge companies. So I think that the challenge is most of the innovation is not coming from them.
Yeah.
A lot comes from these great big companies, but it's a lot of innovation probably in this room, probably over at MIT, probably in some labs somewhere. And, you know, that's the hard part.
Great, another question. Yeah.
Pose a question to Tim. You know, we've been talking the entire day about scale, and scale is often seen as a panacea or sort of the magic bullet. But in the context of international development, or even in a social enterprise setting, is there a time when scale is not appropriate? And how would we recognize those times?
Is there a time when scale is not appropriate? I think in general I'd have to say no, in the sense that we are always stretched to make the difficult trade-offs that bring us to the right intersection between depth of reach of the populations we're working with, that is the quality and the transition that we're trying to get them to make, and the number of people reached. And we simply need to take the scarce resources in that have been entrusted to us to make that happen and raise that to the right level of the grid as much as we can. That's our responsibility.
What about the trade-off between kind of customization and localization and scale, which necessitates standardization often?
Customization?
No, scale necessitates standardization,
Yeah.
as
and I
Marie,
think-
I'm sure, knows. And then how do you trade that off against these very different local
Well, it's true, and
situations?
if you take the $2 billion, roughly under $2 a day, and you sort of section them out, I mean, how many segments would you have,
Right.
and how many unique
Right.
needs would you have defined by culture and geography and socioeconomics? That would be vast, but you do need to, sort of where you can, collect that and segment appropriately and customize at the end of the day.
Can I answer that as well? It's a question we at Bridge are asked a lot because the way we scale is through standardization, and especially when you talk to academics or teachers from the US, everything's about customization per child, and that's one of the biggest questions we get asked. And I don't think there always has to be a trade-off. How I've explained it for us is that we're almost a bit like a choose-your-own-adventure novel, where, it is all pre-written and there is a standard plan, but you get to choose variations throughout it in kind of a modular way. And so standardization doesn't have to mean one size fits completely all. It does mean you have to fit within some of the bounds of it, but there is always, ways, at least for us, that we found that it works.
And you really have to understand your user to do that, right? And that's, I think, one of the huge insights from all of your talks, is you have to understand who you're trying to reach and that journey they might be on, or the options that might be important for them. More questions from the audience back there. Yep.
Hi, my name is Satya Perry. All of you have worked with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and also have entrepreneurial mindsets yourselves. What are some traits that lead to success for the entrepreneurs, and what are some traits that lead to failures?
I think I can answer a little bit. I think living in Kenya, one of the things that's been really inspiring is the amount of young 20-something-year-olds, both Kenyan and expat, who come in and have kind of no fears. They will put crazy ideas out without thinking through them completely. And sometimes it's a little bit insane, and being a now getting older conservative female, I'm like, are you crazy? But I think that idea of experimentation and, not waiting to perfect every idea before you start testing is really essential in an entrepreneur. I think one of the biggest problems I find is when people fall in love with their idea, and because of that get completely blinded about what's actually happening.
If I can answer. I was recently in San Francisco meeting a friend I grew up with, and he started 2 companies in his career, and he's taking a little rest now. He thinks he has one more in him. And during this period of rest, he's chosen to advise several other companies as a board member in the San Francisco area, Silicon Valley. And he was confronted by a 26-year-old entrepreneur who had grudgingly allowed him onto his board. And one day he said, and he's a 48-year-old guy, this friend of mine. He said, I just don't think I have anything to learn from you. And in answer to your question, I think that's probably great and awful all at the same time. I think for an entrepreneur, you've just got to have the stones to get out there and take on the world. But if you take it too far and you think you don't have anything to learn, you're probably going to go over a cliff one day. Balancing that energy is probably an entrepreneur's biggest challenge.
I'll jump in as well. I think it's a great question. Traits, polite persistence. If you have a clear vision, politely pursue it. Don't be a pain in the ass, but polite persistence is very important. Listening is a huge trait missing, and it's not an age, it's not a gender, it's not a where you grew up. It's something that maybe I have a little bit of an advantage being a trained musician, because we have to listen, play well with others, harmonize, all that fun stuff. Take no for an answer, but learn from that. Sometimes no is a great answer. No, it won't work. No, I can't fund you. No, I can't, be a partner, because you need to find out why, and then you can pivot or make whatever additions. Lastly, learn to articulate your ideas clearly. Every startup I look at, 2/3 of them, I can't tell you what the hell they do, what their vision is, what problem they solve, why this team is the right team to do it. So just be really, even though I'm not doing it now, be really ultra concise. You probably see that at Sloan.
Cool.
Where you have to teach
Yeah.
them to
Gotta
speak
be-
clearly and get
You
through
do?
the point.
You do.
I'm done.
Hone your message. Great. I know we have more questions, so let's go with another one. Okay.
So I think people often think that we do need to hit a certain pupil-teacher ratio in order to make the business work. That's like the essential part of the model, is how many kids we can get in general and per teacher, as teachers are actually our greatest capital cost. How we work, I think people, when they hear that, they assume that we only work in really dense urban areas. I think people often also, when they think of poverty, a lot of times they jump to slums. About 28% of our academies are in slums in urban areas. About 44% are in peri-urban areas, and the rest are actually in rural areas. So we do about 1/3 of our work in rural areas. And what changes is more the radius of how far kids walk to school. So when you are in an urban area, most of your pupils come from about 250 meters around the academy. Once you go to a rural area, they might go up to 2 kilometers. And how we assess that is we do a lot of door-to-door household studies before we even consider building an academy in a community, to understand the educational needs of the community, the financial needs, the other academic options out there, and amongst other things, how far parents are willing to let their kids walk to school. In rural areas, it's usually a bit further. So if your radius expands to 2 kilometers versus 250 meters, suddenly you can get enough children for your classrooms.
Cool. Interesting. Another question. Yes, yeah.
Hi, my name is Katrina, and I'm studying mobile broadband and its effects on developing populations and minority populations. And I was wondering, as fast as Bridge is growing and schools that you're picking up, I was wondering, how do you measure success when you're growing at such a rate, and if you use any sort of comparative measures?
So if anyone here is anti-big data, you will hate Bridge. We measure the crap out of everything. And success for us is looking at both the business metrics as well as the academic metrics. I think most often we get asked to speak at business type panels, so we focus much more on numbers, but academics are equally, if not more important, because if our kids aren't performing better, then we're all working a very large amount of hours for nothing. So we do a range of different exams. We usually bring in independent test takers to do them for us. We use USAID design exams that presently, the November 2013 exams, show that our pupils score an average of 35% higher on core reading skills and 19% higher in maths. So that's a really important thing for us. From the business perspective, we're constantly looking at what we call PTR, or pupil-teacher ratio, of how many kids are per class, as well as our total pupil numbers, or total academy numbers, or total teacher numbers, withdrawal rates of pupils, withdrawal rates of teachers, admissions rates, the difference between who's active in school and who's paying, and the measurability of how many academies we can get out each term. Usually we try to get 50 new academies each term, and can we always hit that number? And there's actually a lot more metrics beyond this in terms of how all the technology works, the number of household samples we're getting. You know, even construction has a 700-point mobile audit when they finish an academy to make sure it was designed correctly.
And when you're growing fast, that kind of responsiveness to data is really important, because you could just go off on the wrong way if you're not tracking. And I actually did a bit of work with PSI in the past where I appreciated how much they invested in their dashboarding, which came up earlier. I wonder, Tim, what's your thoughts on that? What kind of data can you look at on a kind of live basis that can help you shape growth trajectories effectively?
Yeah, we've typically called it information for management decision-making. And sort of the old style, I think one of the ways where technology's kind of transformed nonprofit work is you can much more quickly get your data, and Bridge is at the sort of supreme end of that. But all of us are trying to approximate it in our own way. It's absolutely critical.
How do you use data to rule out things? Like, give us examples of stuff you've like pulled the plug on or pivoted on.
Actually, Andrew here Andrew Lala in the back, he's one of our volunteer consultants. He's a student here at Fletcher, and I think he was involved actually in taking a change in tack around how we were organizing our farmers in Haiti. We figured out that we just weren't getting the number of mangoes that we needed for the business to be viable, in export quality. And so we changed entirely what was a sort of given model of work with all these groups that are there. We formed different groups that had never been formed before, and they were formed of farmers who had to know one another, and all had an interest in growing their mango income. They weren't sort of formed by another NGO to give away food, and that was a big differentiator for us.
Cool. Mark, I imagine that you're always hearing entrepreneurs pitching to you who may sometimes be impervious to data that it isn't going the right way. How do you guide them, and how do you make decisions what kind of data do you look for, and do you find yourself having to push people to say, guys, you've got to change your tack because this is not panning out, despite your, valuing of persistence, maybe it's not a good idea?
Oh, boy. Let me see if I can pick this apart. So how do I evaluate?
How do you guide people
guide
who are
them?
so enamored of their vision that they actually maybe don't even want that data? Because you can see how our other two panelists have sort of built it into their organization's philosophy, but it's a continuing struggle for anyone who's got a passion for an idea.
So I'm on the board of a spin-out from Berklee College of Music, which is also where I attended. And I've been trying to work with all of these musicians because none of us finish school knowing how to make a living. It's not cool. In many ways, it's like MIT. I always say it's like the MIT of music. So I'm on the board of a company, and they're bringing world music to a bunch of stuff, and they didn't take my advice on sort of consolidating and articulating their vision. And they raised a little bit of money. We closed a little bit of an A round. They want to be sort of a Cirque du Soleil for social good, and put on some very cool world music shows and get 99 musicians from 99 countries in a room. It's really cool stuff. They've done massive public performances, but they just don't listen, and they're running out of money, and it's frustrating. How do I guide them through it? Show them best practices. I have 100 great presentations that I've seen that have worked, that are formats that work, that are really simple. And I mean, there's a two-word answer I give them to every question, and probably do similar things at Sloan or see things like that at Sloan as well, but it's so what? So everything they say, I just go, so what? We're going to bring 99 people together, blah, 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 blah. So what? And that's like the so what test is basic and it's simple and maybe a little idiotic, I don't know, but it teases out the answer. And so it can be frustrating. As a board member, it can be very frustrating to have a group of people who are very, very smart that just don't want to hear what you're saying. They're so in love with their vision. And at a certain point, it's like, guys, are you making any money? How's that going for you?
Yeah.
And you have to confront them in a you know, I try to be nice, but you have to confront them in a way and with the data. Hopefully
Good.
that's responsive.
Look at the data. Okay, time for one last question, and then I'm going to ask my panelists to sum up a takeaway, if they dare, to tell us about one important idea they want us to leave with regarding how to address the challenges to scale. But meanwhile, anyone have a last question? Right there in the back, there's one.
Hi, this question is for Mark. When a company reaches the size of Vodafone, how do you prevent what usually happens to enormous companies, which is they become conservative and then they have a hard time innovating and yeah.
It's a very, very good question. I'll try and answer quickly. We're about 100,000 people. We're pretty entrepreneurial. I mean, we started out literally, and I think Kate, you probably heard this also in my little chat. We started out being the beneficiary of the UK licenses opening up in the 80s, and we started out over a curry shop in Newbury, which is in the middle of nowhere in the UK. It's sort of west of Heathrow. And it's a very entrepreneurial company, and we look at things in a very entrepreneurial, sensible manner, I think. But it's a big British phone company. It's a big bureaucracy. So how does innovation occur? We have an R&D group. We have something called the Vodafone Zone, which is an incubation and almost like a 50K or 10K contest that you see around. It's in Silicon Valley. We have a bunch of them around the world as well. We have them in we have testing centers in Germany and UK and Italy and Egypt as well. So my group, which is a 300-400 person group within this 100,000 person company, is all about innovating. It's all about, and we have a free hand. We're a fast-growing unit. So I think what they do as a corporation is they look at areas for growth and try and break out almost a unit to go pursue that. Machine to Machine, which is the group I'm affiliated with, is one such innovative thing. It's, again, about connecting things, as we've said. I mean, who would have thought that a phone company would think about not selling smartphones? I mean, they have a whole bunch of other people to do that. So that's how I think, we look at, we have a small venture fund, we look at innovation, our foundation finds some interesting things, and we try and link it all together. So that's how I think we innovate, while still, keeping the stores open and the lights on and the employees happy. We also communicate, the last point I'll make on that is we communicate our vision very clearly. Our CEO is very visible. It's not an imperial CEO with a retinue of, entourage and hangers-on. So he's out there and he gets out and we see him and we talk to him and they see him globally. So hopefully that answers the question, I hope.
Good. So to wrap up, I would love to hear from each panelist if they would offer us a thought, a takeaway idea about what they think is one of the most important things to remember, to bear in mind about what it takes to deliver to the last mile. Why don't you start, Marie?
I think, to me, the most important thing, and it's been a running theme today, is about really knowing your customer. Working in emerging markets, often everyone is treated like a benefactor instead of a customer. And it helps that we're a for-profit organization. And because of that, if we are not living up to the expectations and demands of our customer, we will shut down. And that makes us much more accountable than most of the other organizations you see working in our communities. But it's an easy enough thing for anyone to do, is just get to really know your customers so you are providing a product and service that they want. And you make sure you continue delivering it.
Cool. Tim?
Every project is an experiment. Treat it that way, have a hypothesis, be clear about what you think your actions will result in, measure them, learn.
Great. Words to live by. Mark?
Our greatest growth areas are in the emerging markets, population, newly connected, things like that. So if you're looking to scale, consider the emerging market, consider, again, as Marie said, know your customer, know who you're going to impact. And they are a customer, it's not a charitable thing in a sense. So I think it's showing respect for that class of user. A lot of folks just think this is going to be really great and I'm going to invent it. And so respect, I think your customer would be my final word.
And I'll offer mine. No. I've been teaching for decades, and now as an old prof, the nice thing is I get to see what happens to my students, and I realize just teaching others. It's kind of building on what Tim said. Design your work to be experiments, and then also think about what is it you're learning that you want to build on for yourself, but also for others. And obviously that's your whole business model, but thinking about how I think I reach scale is through my students, but also through different ways to disseminate what we're doing. MIT's putting more and more courses out on the internet. We're trying to also get students to engage in real-world organizations and sort of disseminate impact by interacting with others. So I was thrilled. I have two of my former students helping organizing and running this conference. I had another as an entrepreneur in here. Another one of mine was the founder of Give Directly. So I can see even the little threads of it playing out in today's session. So that's thrilling for me. So you guys go run experiments, try things, figure out what you're learning, think about the user, think about challenging yourself and getting the bad data as well as the good data back, and realizing the power of hearing no, because that tells you more, and saying no, because that lets you focus. Think about modularizing and shifting how people think instead of telling them what to do. And go out there and make a difference and come back to our next conference here. So thank you all very much. Thanks, guys. Good job.